Look, I did something today that I should have done years ago, and I need to tell you about it because what just happened on my computer is honestly hard to believe. I replaced Windows 11 with Linux Mint, and the difference in performance is so dramatic, so immediate, so absolutely undeniable that I'm sitting here wondering why I wasted years of my life dealing with Windows' sluggishness. I'm talking about boot times cut in half, applications opening instantly instead of hanging for seconds, system responsiveness that feels like I upgraded to a computer 3 times more powerful. And all of this on the exact same hardware. Nothing changed except the operating system. And suddenly, my computer feels brand new. Let me give you the actual numbers because this isn't subjective feeling, this is measurable reality. On Windows 11, my cold boot time from pressing the power button to having a usable desktop was 47 seconds. That's with an SSD, with a relatively clean Windows installation, with minimal startup programs. 47 seconds of watching loading screens and spinning circles. On Linux Mint, installed on the same SSD, same hardware, cold boot to usable desktop is 19 seconds. 19 seconds. That's a 60% reduction in boot time just by changing the operating system. I timed this multiple times to make sure it wasn't a fluke. Every single boot, Linux Mint comes up in under 20 seconds, while Windows was consistently taking 45 to 50 seconds. Application launch speeds are even more dramatic. I tested opening LibreOffice Writer, which is comparable to Microsoft Word. On Windows, LibreOffice took about 8 seconds from clicking the icon to having a blank document ready to type. On Linux Mint, same application, same version, it opens in under 2 seconds. Firefox web browser on Windows took 4 to 5 seconds to open and become responsive. On Linux Mint, Firefox opens in about 1 second. File Explorer in Windows has this annoying delay where you click on a folder and nothing happens for a second or two before it opens. The File Manager in Linux Mint, called Nemo, opens folders instantly. No delay, no waiting. Click, and it's there. The system stays responsive under load in a way Windows never did. I tested this by opening multiple applications simultaneously. Firefox with 20 tabs, LibreOffice Writer with a large document, GIMP image editor, file manager, music player all at once. On Windows, this would cause noticeable slowdown. Applications would hang briefly. The whole system would feel sluggish for 30 seconds while everything loaded. On Linux Mint, all the applications opened quickly. The system remained responsive throughout. I could switch between windows smoothly. There was no system-wide slowdown. It just handled the load without breaking a sweat. Here's what's really happening under the hood that explains these massive performance differences. Windows 11 is bloated beyond belief with background services, telemetry collection, cloud sync operations, Windows Update constantly checking for updates, Microsoft Defender scanning everything, compatibility layers for legacy software, advertisements being loaded in the Start menu, Cortana indexing your files, OneDrive monitoring your folders, Edge running processes even when you're not using it. The list goes on and on. All of these background operations consume CPU cycles, RAM, disk I/O, and network bandwidth, even when you're not actively doing anything. Your computer is working hard all the time just to run Windows itself, leaving fewer resources for the actual work you want to do. Linux Mint, by contrast, is lean. The base installation includes only what's necessary to run a functional desktop environment. No telemetry spying on you, no forced cloud sync, no background advertising systems, no redundant services running for features you don't use. The kernel, the core of the operating system, is optimized for efficiency rather than bloated with legacy code and corporate surveillance infrastructure. When you boot Linux Mint, it loads the essential components and then gets out of your way, letting you use your computer's full resources for your actual work instead of wasting them on background nonsense. The difference in RAM usage is telling. Windows 11 idle on the desktop with no applications. Running use is about 4 GB of RAM on my system. Just sitting there doing nothing, Windows consumes 4 GB. Linux Mint idle uses about 800 MB. That's an 80% reduction in memory consumption. On a computer with 8 GB of RAM, Windows leaves you with only 4 GB for applications before it starts swapping to disk and slowing down. Linux Mint leaves you with over 7 GB available. That's the difference between smooth multitasking and constant slowdown. CPU usage tells a similar story. On Windows 11, even at idle, CPU usage bounces around between 5% and 15% because of all those background processes. On Linux Mint at idle, CPU usage sits at 1% to 2%. Your processor is actually idle when you're not using it, which means it runs cooler. Your fan spins less, your laptop battery lasts longer, and when you do need processing power, it's available immediately instead of already partially consumed by Windows overhead. Disk activity is where the difference becomes really obvious if you watch Task Manager in Windows versus System Monitor in Linux. Windows constantly writes to disk even when you're not doing anything. It's updating search indexes, writing telemetry logs, syncing files to OneDrive, downloading updates in the background, prefetching applications you might use, all consuming disk I/O that causes slowdown, especially on traditional hard drives. Linux Mint's disk activity at idle is essentially zero. The disk is only active when you're actually reading or writing files. This means faster application launches, quicker file operations. And if you're still using a hard drive instead of an SSD, the performance difference is even more dramatic. Let me tell you about the installation process, because it's absurdly simple and the performance improvements are immediate. I downloaded the Linux Mint ISO file from linuxmint.com, about 2.5 GB, which took maybe 15 minutes on my internet connection. For awesome, I used a tool called Rufus to create a bootable USB drive from the ISO file. It took about 5 minutes. Restarted my computer, booted from the USB drive, and Linux Mint loaded a live environment where I could try everything before installing. I clicked around, tested my hardware, checked that Wi-Fi worked, verified that the interface felt comfortable, spent maybe 20 minutes exploring. Then I clicked the Install Linux Mint icon on the desktop, and the installer walked me through the process step by step. The installer asked basic questions. Choose your language, choose your time zone, choose your keyboard layout, create a user account with a username and password, and choose whether to install alongside Windows for dual boot or replace Windows entirely. I chose to replace Windows completely because I was done with Microsoft's surveillance and restrictions. The installer asked for confirmation. I clicked continue, and then it just worked. The entire installation took about 15 minutes. No complicated configuration, no driver hunting, no technical knowledge required, just straightforward prompts and automatic setup. After installation finished, I rebooted, removed the USB drive, and Linux Mint came up ready to use. Everything worked. Wi-Fi connected automatically. Graphics looked perfect with no additional drivers needed. Audio worked. USB devices worked. My printer was automatically detected and configured. Web browsing, document editing, file management, everything I needed was installed and functional right out of the box. And immediately, before I even started customizing or tweaking anything, the performance difference was obvious. Boot was faster. Applications opened quicker. The whole system felt snappier. Here's what really shocked me. I expected to spend hours installing applications and configuring settings to get Linux working the way I wanted. But Linux Mint comes with almost everything pre-installed. LibreOffice for documents, spreadsheets, and presentations. Firefox web browser, Thunderbird email client, VLC media player for videos and music, image viewer, PDF reader, file archiver, text editor, calculator, system monitor, software manager for installing additional applications. All the essential software is there from the moment you boot into your new Linux installation. I didn't need to download and install a suite of applications like you do with a fresh Windows install. It was ready to actually use for productive work immediately. The software manager in Linux Mint is what the Microsoft Store wishes it could be. It's a clean, organized catalog of thousands of free applications across every category you can imagine. Graphics and design tools, audio and video editors, programming environments, office software, games, utilities, everything. And installing applications is as simple as clicking install. No exe files to download from sketchy websites. No installer wizards with hidden checkboxes for bundled bloatware. No searching for legitimate download links versus scam ads. Just click install and the application downloads, installs, and is ready to use in seconds. Want GIMP for photo editing? Click install. Want Kdenlive for video editing? Click install. Want Blender for 3D modeling? Click install. It's easier than installing apps on a smartphone. The interface can look and behave almost exactly like Windows if that's what you want, or you can customize it to look completely different. Linux Mint's default Cinnamon desktop environment feels immediately familiar to Windows users. Taskbar at the bottom with a start menu, system tray, open Windows, desktop with icons, file manager that works like Windows Explorer. You're not thrown into some alien environment that requires relearning everything, but unlike Windows, you have complete control to change it. Don't like the taskbar at the bottom? Move it to the top or sides. Want different icons? Install a theme? Prefer a different menu style? Install an alternative. Everything is customizable without registry hacks or third-party tools. The settings are right there in a clear interface. Let's talk about privacy, because this is where Linux truly destroys Windows. Linux Mint collects zero telemetry by default. It doesn't send data about your usage to anyone. It doesn't track what applications you run, what files you open, what websites you visit. Your computer is yours, your data stays on your device, and nobody is watching what you do. There's no Microsoft account requirement. No cloud sync forcing you to upload your files. No Cortana listening for your voice. No advertisements in the operating system. No pre-installed bloatware from manufacturers. Just a clean, functional operating system that respects your privacy completely. The updates in Linux Mint are handled so much better than Windows Update. The Update Manager shows you what updates are available, categorizes them by importance and type, lets you read details about each update, and gives you complete control over what to install and when. Updates don't force restart your computer. They don't install unwanted features. They don't reset your settings. You can review updates, install what you want, skip what you don't, and the system keeps working normally throughout. Most updates don't even require a restart. They just apply in the background and take effect immediately. Only kernel updates require a restart, and even then, the system doesn't force you to restart immediately. It notifies you that a restart is recommended and lets you decide when to do it. Security is another area where Linux excels. The permission system in Linux is more granular than Windows, making it much harder for malware to do system-wide damage. Applications run with limited privileges by default. Even if you accidentally run malicious software, it can only affect your user account, not the entire system, and getting root access requires you to explicitly enter your password. The open source nature of Linux means vulnerabilities are identified and patched quickly by a global community of developers. And because Linux has a smaller desktop market share, it's targeted by far less malware than Windows. Antivirus software is generally unnecessary on Linux because the attack surface is so much smaller and the security model is fundamentally sounder. Gaming on Linux has improved dramatically in recent years. Steam has a Linux client with thousands of native Linux games. Steam's Proton compatibility layer allows most Windows games to run on Linux with minimal performance loss. The Steam Deck runs Linux. If you're a casual gamer or play older titles, Linux handles it fine. If you're a competitive gamer playing specific titles with anti-cheat that doesn't support Linux, you might need to dual boot Windows for those games, but for the vast majority of gaming use cases, Linux works. File compatibility is not an issue. LibreOffice opens and edits Microsoft Office files flawlessly. I opened Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, and PowerPoint presentations, edited them in LibreOffice, and saved them back in Office formats without any compatibility problems. If you absolutely need Microsoft Office, you can use the web versions through Firefox. Photos, videos, music files, PDFs, everything opens normally. You're not locked into proprietary formats or specific software. Your files are your files, and they work everywhere. Now let me give you the exact steps to make this switch yourself, because after experiencing this performance difference, I genuinely believe everyone still using Windows is wasting their computer's potential. First, back up your important files. Use an external hard drive or cloud storage to save documents, photos, music, anything you want to keep. This is critical because if you choose to replace Windows entirely, the installation process will erase everything on your hard drive. Second, download Linux Mint from the official website at linuxmint.com. Choose the Cinnamon Edition for the most Windows-like experience. Download the ISO file, which is around 2.5 GB. Third, create a bootable USB drive. Download Rufus for Windows or Balena Etcher, which works on any platform. Run the tool. Select your USB drive that's at least 4 GB. Select the Linux Mint ISO file you downloaded and create the bootable drive. This takes a few minutes. Fourth, restart your computer and boot from the USB drive. You'll need to access your computer's boot menu, usually by pressing F12, F2, ESC, or DEL during startup, depending on your computer manufacturer. Select the USB drive from the boot menu. Linux Mint will load into a live environment without installing anything. Fifth, try Linux Mint Live. Click around Open Applications, connect to Wi-Fi, test your hardware, make sure everything works. This live session runs entirely from the USB drive and RAM without touching your hard drive. If something doesn't work or you don't like the interface, just remove the USB drive and restart back into Windows. No harm done. Sixth, install Linux Mint if you're satisfied with the live session. Double-click the Install Linux Mint icon on the desktop. Follow the installer prompts. Choose your language, time zone, keyboard layout. Create your user account with a username and password. When you reach the installation type screen, you have two options. Install alongside Windows for dual boot, which lets you choose between Windows and Linux every time you start your computer, or erase disk and install Linux Mint, which removes Windows completely and gives your entire hard drive to Linux. Choose based on your needs. If you're not ready to fully commit, dual boot is safe. If you're done with Windows, erase and install. The installer will show you what it's going to do. Review it carefully, make sure you understand which disk it's modifying, then click Install Now. Confirm your choices and the installation begins. It takes 10 to 20 minutes depending on your hardware. You can continue using the live session while it installs. When installation completes, restart your computer, remove the USB drive, and boot into your new Linux Mint installation. Seventh, update your system immediately after first boot. Open the Update Manager from the menu. It will check for updates, install everything available. This ensures you have the latest security patches and software versions. Eighth, install additional software you need through the Software Manager. Browse categories, search for specific applications, click Install on anything you want. GIMP for image editing, Kdenlive for video editing, Audacity for audio, Steam for gaming, Spotify, Discord, whatever you use. It's all available and easy to install. Ninth, customize the interface to your preferences. Right-click on the taskbar to access panel settings. Add or remove applets, change the menu style, adjust the theme and colors. Go to system settings to configure wallpaper, screensaver, power management, everything. Make it look and behave exactly how you want. 10th, enjoy your dramatically faster computer. Experience the speed, appreciate the privacy, revel in the control. You now have an operating system that works for you instead of spying on you and wasting your resources on corporate surveillance infrastructure. The algorithmic efficiency of Linux is rooted in its design philosophy. Linux was built by programmers for programmers with a focus on doing things correctly and efficiently. Windows was built by a corporation for profit with a focus on vendor lock-in and data extraction. Those different priorities result in fundamentally different performance characteristics. Linux respects your hardware and uses it efficiently. Windows treats your hardware as a resource to exploit for Microsoft's benefit. The kernel architecture makes a massive difference. The Linux kernel is modular, lightweight, and continuously optimized by thousands of contributors worldwide. The Windows NT kernel carries decades of legacy code, compatibility layers for ancient software, and corporate compromises that prioritize business interests over technical excellence. When you boot Linux, you're running lean, efficient code. When you boot Windows, you're running bloated legacy code with surveillance infrastructure bolted on top. This isn't about being a Linux fanboy or hating Microsoft. This is about measurable, objective performance differences that anyone can verify by doing the exact same test I did. Install Linux Mint on your hardware, time your boot, time your application launches, monitor your resource usage, and compare it to Windows. The numbers don't lie. Linux is faster, more efficient, more responsive, and more respectful of your hardware and your privacy. Your computer has potential that Windows is wasting. Every second you wait for Windows to boot is a second Linux would have you working already. Every application that hangs for seconds in Windows opens instantly in Linux. Every gigabyte of RAM Windows consumes for telemetry and bloat is a gigabyte Linux leaves available for your work. Every CPU cycle. Windows burns on surveillance is a cycle Linux dedicates to your tasks. Make the switch. Download Linux Mint today. Try it live from a USB drive. Install it. Experience the performance difference firsthand. You will not believe how much faster your existing computer can be with an operating system that actually respects it. This isn't theoretical. This isn't exaggeration. This is the reality I'm experiencing right now on hardware that Windows made feels slow and Linux makes feel powerful. Stop accepting Windows sluggishness as normal. Stop letting Microsoft waste your computer's resources on spying on you. Stop waiting for boot screens and application launches when you could be working instantly. The solution exists, it's free, it's easy to install, and it will transform your computing experience the same way it transformed mine today. Linux Mint. Download it. Install it. Feel the speed. You'll never go back.